Yes, I do.
All right, thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Good morning, Mr. McGivern.
Good morning.
Could you please state your full name for the record?
Travis Edward McGivern,
And where do you currently live?
Los Angeles, California.
Where are you testifying from today?
Los Angeles, California.
What is your current occupation?
I am a security professional.
And how long have you been a security professional?
Roughly 16 years, a little over 16 years.
Do you know the plaintiff in this case, Johnny Depp?
Yes, I do.
How do you know Mr. Depp?
I've worked for Mr. Depp for a little over 9 years.
And what's your position for Mr. Depp?
Security professional, personal protection.
When did you first start working for Mr. Depp?
March of 2013.
And when did you first meet Mr. Depp?
Couldn't say for sure. Probably sometime around then, March or April 2013.
What do you do as a member of Mr. Depp's security team?
Residential security, estate security, if he's in LA. When he's in LA, if he wants to go anywhere, I'll take him wherever he wants to go. I have protected his children before. Yeah, just basically ensure the safety and well-being of Mr. Depp and his family.
And are you currently employed for Mr. Depp?
I am.
What other means of employment do you have?
So Mr. Depp's travel schedule is pretty regular. So when he's not in town, work slows down a little bit. So I have actually in the last 6 months, just under 6 months, picked up a full-time job working for another client.
When you first started working for Mr. Depp, how often would you see him in person?
Hard to say. When he's in town, I saw him on a daily and or nightly basis. I work nights mostly. Obviously, when he's out of town, that changes. But yeah, when he's in town, pretty much daily.
When did you first meet Miss Heard?
Again, I couldn't give you an exact date, but I would say sometime in 2013, maybe summer 2013.
And when you were working for Mr. Depp, how often would you see Miss Heard when they were in a relationship?
In the beginning, not very often. At one point, they moved to downtown LA to the Eastern Columbia building and became a little more frequent.
When Mr. Depp and Miss Heard were staying at the Eastern Columbia building together, how often would you actually be in their apartment with them?
That would vary depending on the situation, but a few times a week would be my best estimate. It depended on what was going on, and there'd be nights where I wouldn't see them at all. There'd be nights where I would. Best estimate would be a few times a week.
During that time, did you have occasion to see Mr. Depp and Miss Heard interacting with each other?
I did, yes.
And how often would you estimate?
No, anytime I was in there, they were typically interacting. So I'd say a few times a week, several times a week.
How would you describe the interactions between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
It would depend. I mean, it would depend. Sometimes they were super loving, super happy, and then the next night they could be arguing. And initially, when I first started working down at the lofts, things were cool. More than moving forward, things got a little more volatile, moving in the longer they were there.
When did you start noticing more arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard?
So I want to say like the end of 2014, they started staying down there pretty regularly. There were a few incidents where there were fights, but March 2015, when they came back from Australia, was when I really started to notice a change.
And how often would you witness arguments or fights during that time?
From in March?
From March and thereafter.
So when they came back from Australia, the arguments were pretty regular. Wouldn't say nightly, but every other night, several times a week, there would be arguments.
And what did you observe in the arguments that you personally witnessed?
So it was typically, I would come in, I'd get a text from Mr. Depp. I would go to Penthouse 3, which is where they stayed. Either stay by the door as requested, or in the kitchen. And then, I mean, it was just verbal arguments, yelling. It was typically Mr. Depp wanting to get out of there, and so there was the trying to convince Ms. Heard to let us leave, and yeah, I mean, lots of name calling, lots of F-bombs, you know.
And who was the name calling directed at?
So that was typically Ms. Heard directing her feelings toward Mr. Depp.
And what do you recall Ms. Heard saying in those instances?
Oh dear. It would vary, and to be honest, I tried to not pay attention. I was just there to get Mr. Depp out of there, but you know, there were times I've heard Ms. Heard call him a fucking deadbeat dad, if I can say that. I apologize to the court. If a fucking washed up, fucking cunt, you name it. She's spewed it.
How would you describe your own interactions with Ms. Heard in the time that you worked for Mr. Depp?
Objection, relevance. All right, what's the relevance of his interactions?
His interactions when he was involved in when he was witnessing these altercations.
Well, if you want to ask that question.
Okay. How would you describe your interactions with Ms. Heard when you were present during an altercation between her and Mr. Depp?
For the most part, there wasn't really interaction. There were a few times where I was trying to get Mr. Depp away from the situation, and Miss Heard didn't like my involvement in the situation, and she, on one occasion, let me know how she felt about that.
And what did she say to you in that instance?
A lot. It was a lengthy, one-sided conversation. But she basically demeaned my career choice, called me a fucking yes man. And honestly, there were parts of that where she, she was like, how would you feel if someone was involved in your relationship? Which I sympathize with. But yeah, she definitely threw some shade on me and my chosen career.
Now, you mentioned that the arguments between Mr. Depp and Ms. Heard increased when they returned from Australia in March 2015. When did you first see Ms. Heard when she returned from Australia?
So I picked Miss Heard up from the airport on March 9th. Yeah, that was the first time I saw her when she got back.
And who else was with her?
A gentleman named Ben King, who I later found out, I didn't know who he was initially, but later found out he was the house manager or property estate manager of the place they were staying at in Australia.
How would you describe Ms. Heard's demeanor when you picked her up at the airport?
She seemed normal, nothing out of the ordinary. She was pleasant. She was polite, like she usually was.
How much time did you spend with Ms. Heard that day?
Not a lot, but at least the car ride from LAX to downtown LA to the lofts. Couldn't tell you how long that took, but probably 45 minutes to an hour. I believe I escorted them or helped them up to penthouse 3 and was maybe in there for very, very briefly, a minute or two, and then I left. So overall, let's estimate an hour.
And how close to Ms. Heard were you that day?
I mean, in the car where I'm driving, she's in the seat right behind me to my right, so there's a few feet there. I think when I picked him up, I don't remember if I hugged her or not, but I know I probably grabbed some luggage, so I was within a few feet.
And what time of day was it when Ms. Heard arrived at the airport?
Early afternoon. I want to say they landed at around 1 p.m.
What, if any, injuries did you observe on Ms. Heard that day?
I didn't notice any injuries.
When did you first see Mr. Depp when he returned from Australia in March 2015?
I don't know, to be honest. I know it was after Miss Heard came, but I couldn't give you an exact date.
And what, if any, injuries did you observe on Mr. Depp when he returned from Australia?
So Mr. Depp had his right hand, heavily wrapped. I didn't actually see an injury, but his hand was wrapped.